What's up YouTube? I've got another full video walkthrough for you today of my recent poster called Ascension, and there's a lot of small details involved as well as analog printing, so let's jump straight into Photoshop to walk you through the steps. So let's go. Okay, so jumping into Photoshop here, this is the original poster design and we're going to use this as a reference to come back to throughout the process. So you can see I've got this cool little half-tone image going on as well as these nice analog printed kind of ink bleed effects. So you can see the scan lines going across as well. And it just has such a nice look when it's actually done manually. I'm going to recreate this and I'm going to walk you through it step by step. So let's jump into the new canvas. So if we come on File, New. Now I'm going to be using my standard for poster designs, which is 3840 by 4800 pixels. And I'm actually going to set the background to black for the moment just to work on the text. And then press OK. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is working on this text layout. So now we've got this really fine text shaped into the letter A. So we're going to be working that in as well. Okay, so the first step I'm going to take here is just to set some grid lines up. So I'm going to come up to View, Guides, and New Guide Layout. I'm going to use 10 columns, 4 rows, and you can just copy all of the rest of these settings here. I've got 100 pixel margins, 50 gutter. So I'm just going to use these as a baseline. Now these aren't going to be exact, and I'm not going to stick to them perfectly. It's more just to get an idea of organizing everything. So the first thing I'm going to do is type our title in. So I'm going to type in Ascension here. Now the typeface I'm using is Ivy Presto Display. Now I believe you get this through Adobe Fonts. So if you want to check that out, go for it. And I've just turned the tracking down here to 120. So now I'm going to size this and I'm just going to use this grid line as a base here for the title. I'm going to say this is okay for me at the moment. Now simply just to work in these small paragraph text areas here, I'm going to copy the actual text, but I'm just going to show you exactly what I've done to format them. So again, I'm just going to open the grid lines up. I'm just going to make a text box in this corner here and paste that text here. Now you can see I'm using Helvetica Now Display regular size 4. Keep the kerning on optical so that it is all well spread. Now from here, I'm just going to drag these around with the grid lines and just see what kind of layout I'm going to work into it. So if I bring in the rest of the text as well. Whenever I'm working with paragraphs and text boxes, I'm simply just going to use Command J. I'm going to duplicate it, drag it down, and then just use this because it's already copied the formatting. It's going to save you a whole bunch of time. So now I'm not going to make this layout exactly the same as my other one. I'm going to kind of change it around a little bit. Once again, Command J, duplicate, drag it over. I'm going to just paste my text in here. Duplicate this, drag it. Now you can line these up however you like. I kind of like using an alteration of left and right justified just to give it a little bit of asymmetry. If you're creating more of like a minimal piece, I like to use squares and lines just to kind of add in these shaped assets. It kind of gives it a really technical look. So I'm just going to use the line tool here and I'm just going to drag in a white lines. Now set the fill and stroke to white. I'm going to keep the stroke at between 1 and 2. I think I'm going to go for 2 for the moment. Actually, no, I'm going to turn this back down to 1. Now, I'm just going to keep these really thin. Just use this line tool. You can follow the grid lines if you like. You can not. It's just there as a guide. Doesn't have to be exact. So I'm going to set mine to about there. And then I'm going to just hold down left click on this and I'm going to select rectangle tool. Now here, I'm just going to bring in some small rectangles. Now again, the kind of reference I use for these whenever I make these small shapes is more like a heads up display in gaming and whatever. So if you have these heads up display and all of these kind of like markers and figures all based around, it kind of to me mimics that aesthetic. I'm just going to highlight both of them. I mean Command E to combine there and then Command J to duplicate that. And then I'm going to use this as a base and I'm just going to kind of drag these over the piece here. So now I don't think the duplication works, but I'm just going to redo it again then combine these together. And then with these small rectangles, it kind of shapes the frame. It really helps kind of like assert the grid. And then you can also add in some slight changes wherever you like them. I'm going to add in some more lines for the moment. So I'm just going to get the line tool here and I'm going to drag up on this grid line up to the top of that paragraph text and then across from here just to there. And there we go. You know, it just helps to create shape. I'm actually going to move this left one a little bit in. Doesn't need to follow the grid on this one for me. Or I might put it on towards the other grid line. It can be a bit of a pain to move. But yeah, I'm just going to drag that over to this left-hand side against that grid line. And there we go. You can see it coming together now. Just going to keep using the rectangle tool here. You can even do it with ellipses, whatever you like. Yeah, I'm just going to use this. Maybe bring one over to this kind of small gap here. Just work in the margins. Now you can see I've taken this dot of the eye and I've used it as an asset to ascend up the piece. You can see these small copies here. So I'm just going to duplicate this here. So I'm going to select this text layer that we've got. I'm going to press M for the marquee tool. Now I'm just going to highlight the circle. Command C, make a new layer, Command V to paste it on. And from here, now that I've got that aligned, I'm just going to open my grid lines up just as a kind of a vertical reference. But I'm going to pull this one up here, duplicate that again, and then just size these down and just play around with them however you like. But something like this for me works. You know, just keep it really simple, but it's kind of a nice effect. And now I believe that is all of the text, apart from this large A. So I'm going to work in how I've created this now. Now to actually work in the actual type content of this, I've used ChatGPT to shape just a really loose and long paragraph story about the word Ascension. So it's just to provide me with some text assets to use for this. See, now the whole point of it is that it isn't really going to be readable. It's more just to shape the A. So I'm just going to copy the actual text here, and then I'm going to show you how I've crafted this into the shape of the A. So I'm just going to type the letter A in. Now the typeface I used for this was Villanelle. So I think it was Villanelle light oblique. So there we go. So now I'm going to convert this to a shape, and I'm just going to kind of line this up where I want it. Now convert it to a shape helps because it creates these transform lines right perfectly on the edges. There we go. Just shape this around. We're going to just craft that into the top corner. Now I kind of want these to overlap. It gives a little bit of layering. So now I've got this text shaped and it is converted to a shape. I'm going to press T. I'm going to click in this A and then paste that text in. So now if I just hide the shape A, you can see immediately it's already pasted in. Now here, I'm simply just going to play with these numbers here, the actual sizing and leading, just to fill the entire shape of the A. So you can see if I set that down to 4, it immediately gets filled and there's some space left over. So if I do 3.5, it's a little bit too little. 3.8, probably more around the 3.8 mark. See, now you could work on this for a very long time to get it really to specifically fit within that shape. But just for the sake of time, I'm just going to keep it quite loose and vague. But you can see here, it does shape paragraphs, you know, it does read. Obviously, it's a form where it's going to be incredibly difficult to, but the kind of point of this is it's just going to act as a more of a visual aesthetic rather than actually being readable. But yeah, now we've got the type layout. I've hidden our black background and I've grouped all of these assets. Now once I've grouped these with Command G, I've slapped on a color overlay. So come down to effects and color overlay, and I've set this to black. So now I've slapped on a color overlay here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send this to my printer. So I've saved this as a PNG, I'm going to print it out and then take the paper, scan it back in again. And it's going to create this really nice analog looking print effect. And you're going to see this is the result. So now the layout is slightly different here because I did do this yesterday. So this is the original design I made. But you can see it's got these really natural scan line looks, which is just amazing. All the really like grainy texture around the outside of the letters. This text almost becomes completely illegible, which I actually just love the look of. Even these kind of natural scratching here. I think the scan lines are probably my favorite bit. You know, you just get really good detail. My printer is notoriously bad, so this is perfect. I really need to get new ink. Okay, so now we've got the scan layer printed and back into Photoshop again. We're going to start working in this image. So if I come back over to the reference, you can see I've got this really cool kind of half-tone image effect that's just layered over all of the assets. Now, you can see it's kind of a faint abstract outline of this woman's face. And I think kind of the abstract nature of the shapes can make it seem as if it's rising. Now, I did intend on using a different image to start with, which is why I named it Ascension, but I felt it still worked quite well. So I'm going to show you this image that I've brought in here. I immediately knew I had to use the filter gallery. So with the image selected, I'm going to make sure that my colors are set to default. So I'm going to press D. See, now they already are set to default, but yeah, press D, make sure that black is foreground and white is background. Then come up to filter and filter gallery. Now from here, my thought process was to make sure that this is now a black and white image and that there was no kind of mid-range. So the first effect I used was torn edges. So now if I come into fit in view here so you can see a preview, I'm going to get rid of this halftone effect. Now torn edges is going to make it solid black and white. It's like you're adding a threshold layer. So with this, I just played around with the image balance. But you can see as you play around with this, you can get a lot of different areas hidden and revealed. So I believe it was on 23, so I'm just going to keep it at this value for the moment. From here, I then wanted to make sure that the white areas were converted into a halftone effect. So then I added this halftone pattern effect on the top. So if you wanted to do that, just come down, press the plus, add it on top, but you can find them both in the sketch section. So now from here, I did a kind of small size, so around 5 contrast as well, pattern type on dot. So then if I was to zoom into this, you can see these white areas becoming the halftone effect. So when I press OK here, now to start with, this almost looks as if it's a PNG background, but this is the halftone effect. So now I'm going to show you how I've formatted this to make it an overlay. Now from here, I decided I needed to use blending options to try and cut out all of the black, so we just leave the white behind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this layer here, come down to effects, select blending options. Now from this point, on the current layer slider, to remove the black color ends, I needed to drag this slider in. So you can see as I do this, it's just leaving the halftone effect. So I'm going to drag this in until it's sort of at a level. So if I drag this over here so you can see immediately, just even with this colorway, looks really cool because it's this kind of middle ground of a gray between the black and the white. Now I'm going to set it around, let's say 190-ish. And if I zoom in, what I'm going to do to correct this is just double click on these layer overlaps here. And I'm going to use Option as I slide to kind of split these sliders. Now this is going to create a little bit more of a softer contrast so that you can see now it's just solid dots. Whereas if they were together, they've got these kind of dark outlines on them. So I'm going to drag this slider right towards the end and then maybe even drag this one a little bit further until about here. So this is good for me. So now this is almost impossible to see. So what we're going to do, duplicate this layer, Command J, hide the original just as a spare. Then I'm going to convert this to a smart object. So now we've just got this white overlay. Now it's very hard to see right now, but we're going to just add a color overlay on it so that we can reveal it. So come down to effects, color overlay, and immediately you can see this is now being revealed. So I'm going to set this to kind of like a mid-range gray, maybe even slightly more on the white side. It's just going to mean that every one of these halftone dots is now just going to be a solid color. So I'll say this color is okay. So I'm going to set this and just press enter here. So we've got the base of the design done. So now what I'm just going to do is just throw in a gradient map and try and play with color. So now because I manually printed this, I kind of wanted the idea of maybe like washed out paper to kind of support this. So if I come down to effects and gradient map, adjustment and gradient map, I'm just going to select this slider. As always, there is so many routes you can take. You can play around with this for hours and just find out color combinations you wouldn't have guessed before. So I'd always definitely recommend using gradient maps to just play around with potential color in your pieces. But I think as I was scrolling through, I thought that this kind of orange color worked quite well. Now, I do use orange in a lot of my work, but I feel like it's a really nice contrast. So what I'm going to do as a base is I'm going to use black and white. Now, instead of using solid black and solid white, I've got a few kind of presets saved where it's a bit more of an off-white and a lighter gray. So I'm just going to set this gray around here. You know, it's quite dark, but it's not solid black. And then set the white around between the orange and the yellow hue and just drag it slightly in, becoming a lot more of a kind of faded, washed out look. So now I'm going to press OK on this. And this is now going to be the base of color. So you can see as I zoom in, really nice natural color. And now I'm just going to come back onto this gradient map. Make sure that the gradient icon is selected so that if you use the eyedropper tool, it doesn't just select black or white because it's unmasked. And then I'm going to come to this mid-range here and I'm going to work in this kind of like rusty orange color. So what I'm looking at here is just the Ascension title as the primary color reference because everything else I'm going to blend in. So I want to get slightly more of a hue there, bring it maybe a little bit more pale. And then this color I'm happy with. So now I just need to play with the actual placement and see how I can work it in. So I believe now as we're going from orange to this white hue, it's kind of making everything else slightly pale orange and a little bit pink. So you can see here, it's a little bit more of a beige color. So I'm going to add in one more slider and I'm going to make this more on the gray end. Now it's going to be a similar gray as to what we used for this halftone dots, just so that the actual halftone pattern is going to remain as a certain color. So now we just need to play around with the balance. I'm going to bring this white slider in to take a little bit less. Take a little bit of the paper out and drag this to the left to increase that contrast. I'm going to make this slightly less gray, maybe even add a little bit of a tone to it here. Say about there's good. And now really just play around with this for a while and try and get the contrast right to exactly how you want it. Now this may take a while, but you know, the longer you spend on it, the more accurate your effect's going to be to what your vision is. And now I'm just going to wonder if I take this out, I actually don't even need the black there at the end. Yeah, I'm just going to adjust this to be a slightly brighter hue. And yeah, I think for the moment I am satisfied with this. You know, I can keep going for a while, but just for the sake of the video, I'm just going to leave it here for the moment. But this is somewhat accurate to my original, which is quite good. So, and now just to finalize the texture, I've added a noise overlay. So I'm going to come down to the gradient map, select this so that everything I apply is going to be above it. I'm going to select adjustments and solid color. Now, hex code 808080. This is going to be a 50% gray. Now, the reason we pick 50% gray is when we apply effects to it, it's going to apply somewhat evenly over every color because it's right in the middle. So I'm going to convert this to a smart object, come to filter, camera raw filter. And then on this effects drop down on the right, you're going to select this and you're going to make sure that this drop down bar is selected on grain. Now I'm going to set this grain to around 80, size to around 20 and roughness to about 30. I might actually increase the size to 100. I'm just going to keep that there just as a good base, increase the roughness slightly. I don't really want it to be a harsh grain, just subtle to just overlay it and tie it all together. Just going to hit OK here. And now you can just rename this to noise. And now this is your active noise layer. So you can see really subtly it's applying over this text here as well as the halftone dots. So it gives them a bit of texture even though they weren't on the initial print. So you can see if I turn this off, it just ties everything in really nicely. And there we go, that is the final step, and here is the finished design. Now, as always, thank you so much for making it to the very end. I do hope that you find these videos useful in one way or another. And if you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you again very soon.